Hello to all the little knife gremlins that tune in for the first Knife of the Week, or KOTW, the only knife show where all proceeds go to canine cancer research. So thanks for being here. This is what the format's going to look like. Every now and then it will be a breakdown of a single knife, just going into the specifics of it, talking about it, taking it apart, looking at its guts and putting it back together. And along the way, we will have fun and giggle and laugh and learn and live and love. And I will teach a couple things about knife stuff for those who want to listen or have me on in the background while you're doing dishes or some shit. That is awesome as well. So this is going to be fun for me. And so that's what I'm going to do every now and then. It's going to be one of those, but also sometimes, and there will be, I'm going to shoot for one post a week. Some of the videos will instead be, a special episode, like just talking all about how to sharpen your knife, or what kind of tools are nice to have, just really basic stuff. I will tell you, what is a good idea to just have, like a couple screwdrivers, and I will tell you what is all of the extra kit if you wanted to go down that path as well. So I'll just go in quite a bit of depth on everything. So today, to get started, we are doing just a knife overview rather than a special episode. I just thought that this would be a good way to start Knife of the Week. We're going to look at the Kershaw Natrix in copper, specifically the Kershaw Mini Natrix. I've got a couple of things here that are notes as to what I want to mention for each knife that we look at. So obviously we're going to start with the make and model. Kershaw is owned by Kai USA. This model is called the Natrix, Natrix, and again, it is the Mini Natrix. I can go into a little bit more depth some other time, or if anyone cares at all about where this design comes from, because there's a little bit of interesting lore behind it. Long story short, Kai USA, the parent company, I believe, had another knife by a different name from their line called ZT, or Zero Tolerance knives, that had this form factor as well as this odd little locking interface that we'll talk about in a minute. And Microtech, who is always in one way or another getting into some drama in the industry, followed up making their Microtech Matrix, which had a really similar thing going on, and there were some lawsuits involved, blah, blah, blah. And lo and behold, Kershaw said, fuck you, and put out this as the Kershaw Natrix. So just as a misnomer, sounding really close to the Microtech Matrix, a little bit petty, a little bit awesome, but it is originally owned by Kai USA, I believe. So they are the OGs of this somehow weirdly historied knife. So the year, I think this came out in 2018, this specific model and this specific configuration with these copper scales. It is manufactured in China, which is not always a bad thing with pocket knives if you know what you're looking for. If you're looking at actual enthusiast pocket knives, China does put out a lot of really good material. There are companies that I've mentioned plenty of times to people interested in knives at a good price, such as Kaiser and Vosteed, CJRB, and a bunch of others. And there's also some super premium knives that get up into the hundreds of dollars and in the very, very precise and impressive mechanical engineering, as well as really impressive machining on really premium materials. Like Kunwu is a Chinese company, I believe, that makes some just really high-end knives. So you do have good stuff coming out of China, absolutely, and at good prices, but you have to know what to look for. It can't be the same gas station garbage as some companies like MTech or whatever, just what the average person who doesn't know any better might carry. There is a lot of garbage, of course, that you could find, but there's also a lot of good stuff. And so Kershaw sourced this knife out of China, and it is really well made, as we're gonna get into. The steel here is D2 tool steel, which is a classic for knives around this range. It's a really quality steel that is really well balanced between all of its traits, between corrosion resistance, hardness, edge retention, etc., while being a little bit lacking in the corrosion resistance department compared to some other modern blade steels. It does require a little bit of oil here and there to maintain it. I've never had any of them rust on me, but I take pretty good care of my knives. And D2 steel is just generally for, unless you're a real steel snob for some reason, which you never really need to become that to really enjoy your knives to a high level, in my opinion. D2 is perfectly good. Like, I think people who complain about D2 online are just trying to sound interesting. It used to be a hyper premium steel. Now we've come out with more stuff and things that outperform it. But unless you're interested in getting into metallurgy, I'd say that you should be perfectly happy with D2 around the price point, which we will get to as well. As we've mentioned, these scales over here are copper. They are solid copper. They're not copper colored. Holy shit. They're not copper colored. They are actually just full on copper scales. And so they weigh a little bit, but I don't mind a little bit of heft to a knife. I think it can feel quite premium and I enjoy it a lot. These are two other knives on which I have put aftermarket copper scales. And you can see copper does change color over time and gets darker and darker, and it patinas as you use it. And the wear and tear will change the look of that copper, which I quite enjoy that evolution through carrying the knife. So that is something that I look forward to, though the fresh copper like this just looks so lovely. Now we're going to talk about the blade shape, which you've already seen me open it a couple of times. The blade shape is actually what I would say is like a modified sheep's foot. It's really similar to this more classic. You can kind of see where the sheep's foot name comes from. It kind of has this hoof-like silhouette. Some people might refer to it as a cleaver or other, but this shape is generally considered a sheep's foot. And this is like an elongated, stretched out, more aggressive looking, more momentous sheep's foot, so to speak. So pretty unique blade shape, and it looks quite nice in my opinion. This knife generally, as I'll get into more, I love the aesthetics of this knife. I handled the full-sized copper Natrix from the collection of a buddy who came over here once with his knife collection. We had a wonderful time, some drinks, and we talked about knives, and he said he had a blast, and then he completely ghosted me. Maybe I just got a little too excited around all of his knives, but lo and behold, I knew I had to get myself a Kershaw Natrix, and I gravitate towards smaller knives a lot of the time. I just find that in my day-to-day life and in having them in my pocket, I never really need anything much bigger than any of this. I do occasionally enjoy carrying a big old honkin' chunk of steel in my pocket. However, for my day-to-day and when it comes to my convenience factor, I do like this size. So I went with the mini Natrix. The lock type. So this is an interesting, weird little hybrid between a liner lock. So this knife right here would have a more classic liner lock where you have the scales on the outside of the knife, in this case these orange micarta scales. Then you have these steel liners on the inside of that, and one of those liners has this lock bar which is engaging the back of the blade over here and thus locking the knife open. So this would be again a liner lock, but we have on some knives what's called a frame lock where that cutout is not in a liner, but actually part of the frame or of the scales of the knife. And that gives you more contact. It's a little bit of a sturdier, but maybe sometimes less ergonomic and easy to operate version of the liner lock. So those are two options that are commonly found in pocket knives. And this guy has this weird thing where it's like a frame lock, but it's like inset. The steel is inset in the copper, so it's just kind of like a weird in-between, which just makes this design a little bit more unique. I don't think it's much better than a typical frame lock or other, but it does allow for these copper scales. So I think it's really neat. It's, again, just not entirely necessary. It's just a cool part of this knife's design, and it does work really well. Looking at the pocket clip, it is reversible, meaning it could be switched for left or right hand carry. You can see you've got those little holes for the hardware over there. We absolutely love to see that. It's important to get some good left-handed representation out there in the community. This is a slightly short, small pocket clip, in my opinion, for the proportions of this knife. However, I hear that it's more so about how you use it. You know, it's not about how big it is. I think this is perfectly average size. It's perfectly functional. No one's ever complained about it, and you should just, you know, get over it. It'll work for you, just like it works for me. So that is the pocket clip. I do wish that the pocket clip was inset in this knife. This is a minor complaint I have. When I say inset, you can see, for example, on this knife, there is a cutout over here in which the pocket clip and its hardware sits in flushly. You can see over here there's no hardware sticking out, whereas on this knife it is not inset in there. That's just a little detail, but I typically do prefer for it to be inset. It just doesn't snag on the pocket as much. I don't have that problem too bad with this guy, but I have some other knives where it's not inset and it can sometimes, due to the geometry of that pocket clip, kind of get snagged on the brim of my jeans pocket or other. And so I do like when a knife pays attention to that little detail of having a cutout for the pocket clip to be inset into. It's a little thing, but it goes a long way. So unfortunately this knife does not have that, but it makes up for it by at least being reversible, which is awesome. Okay, let's check the action and alignment. So this knife is perfectly aligned down the center. I have taken it apart a couple times at this point, but the blade just comes right to where it should be. Everything is like really well calibrated in there, so well machined, and everything's nice and even, and the blade is centered down the line as it should be without having to tighten the pivot too much. Speaking of tightening the pivot too much, when it comes to that action, my one complaint with this knife, and you can see that the main means of opening it is through this flipper tab on the back over here, is that the detent is really quite tight, and I think it'll break down a little bit over time and get a little bit easier to open. But when I speak of the detent, I'm speaking of how much force is needed to start unlocking and actuating that knife. You'll notice that when it closes, it kind of clicks into place. We'll see when we take the knife apart that, as is typical in liner locks and frame locks, there's a little detent ball that exists in the lock face over here, in the frame lock or the liner lock, and that actually interfaces with a little notch that is cut out into the blade where that little ball fits in a little socket, and that gives it that little click at the end of it closing that retains it closed this way so that the knife isn't just falling open. And it also is what requires pressure when you start, actuating it, whether it was with a thumb stud or a thumb hole, or whether it was with a flipper tab like this. It's, the detent is referring to how much force to break that interface of the ball and the socket so that the knife rockets open like this and locks up. Well, this guy is quite tight. It does take a little bit more force than I would like for it to, so that there is a, for example, there's a fuller cut across here, which I think is primarily just for design purposes as well as weight reduction, but it can also be used to reverse flick the knife like that, which is just kind of a neat trick. And I always love more than one option on to how to open a knife. But you'll notice I can kind of struggle with that a little bit just because it takes so much force on my middle finger to do that, because the detent is quite tight. So the upside of that is this knife, you could throw it around the room and it probably will not open. Like, you could throw it at the wall and it will remain closed. It'll only open when you willingly open the knife. So that is a positive. But if I was opening it and closing it for, hours at a time, like I am right now in this video, it quickly is kind of tiring on the finger to have to apply so much pressure. I want to point out really quick, I don't know if it comes up on the camera, but I am just raining saliva down on the mat over here, so pardon all of the spit that is in my line of sight, really apparent throughout the video. Just hydrating my knives. It's important to keep your knives nice and hydrated with saliva. Let's look at the measurements on this knife over here. I'm going to break out my little ruler. It is about 6.5 inches long open. The blade is about 3 inches long, and so the handle by itself is about 3.5 inches long. You can kind of give or take from where you want to start, but overall it is a relatively small knife, and to me it is actually, no joke, just a perfect size. And again, a lot of my knives gravitate to this size just about. I have a couple knives that are bigger. I'm going to quickly grab one that is a large knife. And it's not necessarily big and bulky, but it is just a much longer, full-size, quote-unquote, knife, the Meguiron Acri over here. And you can see that's a lot more blade, a lot more handle. However, in my day-to-day life, typically, when I actually need to use my knife, this is perfectly good. And it also just is maybe a little bit less real estate taken up in your pocket. I enjoy both, obviously, but I do personally tend to gravitate towards slightly smaller knives for my everyday carry. Now let's talk about the price. I believe this knife is under $60. I'm gonna do a quick Google search. I will not be editing this out. I don't want to do any editing on these. I want to keep them very flow of, just like stream of consciousness, and I'm not going to really bother editing them down, so bear with me when I have to look shit up for a second. Okay, it's $53 right now. So this knife is really inexpensive for high quality it is. And I'll skip right now to talk a tiny bit before I open it up about my recommendation. I would absolutely recommend this knife to someone at this price, whether it was to add to their collection or to just be their daily driver knife. I think that this will do everything that you would ever want it to, and very reliably so. So this is a knife that I would absolutely recommend for purchase, and that I would absolutely recommend to someone who's looking for a one and done knife under, $100. This would be a great contender, but there are so many great contenders for that category, as there's a lot of good shit out there right now in the knife industry. Let's do a takedown. So I have taken this knife apart before, and I want to start with a PSA. When you are taking a knife apart like this, a folding knife that has these pretty classic parameters to it, you usually start by taking the pivot out. I did notice when I was trying to take the pivot out, and it is a T8 Torx bit, which is pretty standard for the pivot, is often T8, and the body screws are often T6 on most knives across various makes and models. Sometimes you have T8s all around, but T8 and T6 are really the two Torx bits that you need for your screwdriver to take apart most knives. And this guy, I started twisting it, and it just wasn't coming done. It just wasn't coming out, and I didn't want to force anything. And I used my little brain for a second, and I realized that what these little jokers did is that they put Loctite in the pivot screw, which I don't see that done on all knives these days. I'm not a fan of Loctite being all up in there because I like to be able to adjust my pivot to loosen or tighten the knife, as well as just because sometimes I need to take it apart for cleaning or for recording a stupid little video like this. And so they had put Loctite in there. And so if you ever feel that the knife is just not, like, if the screw's not giving, don't force it. It probably has some Loctite, at which point you need to get a heat gun or some kind of, some heat source. Heat guns are really cheap. You don't need to break the bank. Just go to Harbor Freight or whatever and get a heat gun for like $10, and it is often useful. You need to get a heat gun and heat up that screw, and that loosens the Loctite up completely, and you can then remove the screw safely. And so now that I've done that one time, and heated up the Loctite and broken it down, the knife can safely be opened without any issue for cleaning purposes or for just showing it to you clowns over here. I do like to take my knives apart in a setting in which I won't lose all of the little pieces. So I use this gun mat that I usually just use to lay out my stuff that I take with me every day, my keys, etc., blah, blah, blah. I take my knife apart on this because it has these neat little thingy-majiggers, magnets. It has magnets that catch the little pieces. So let's look at what we've just done here and what we're looking at and what's happening. So first of all, you'll notice I'm getting oil everywhere. That's because I keep my knives oiled. Maybe this one had a little bit too much on it, but so I took the knife apart. I undid the body screws. Now you can get a better look at over here. And I don't think I need to take it down further than this because you can already see everything that's going on in the knife from here. I would just be giving myself a headache for no reason if I stripped off the final parts here. But this is where this steel frame lock thing, this sub frame lock, this weird hybrid, connects with the copper scale. So that's just kind of an odd thing. And I could remove it if I took out this pocket clip, which, why not? We'll take out the pocket clip as well. I don't like this skinny one. I like this guy. It's much easier to use. I tightened everything down pretty good last time, but you always want to make sure you're not tightening things too hard because you don't want to strip your screws. A lot of more premium knives, they'll come, even sometimes just really good value knives from good companies, they will send with extra hardware. That way, if you strip any of your screws by being by being overly aggressive with them or by putting too much torque on them, you can just replace them that way. So we also took off the pocket clip. It could be, this is how you would put it on either side. It's just 2 screws. We're gonna keep it on the right side, but now we also have access to these 2 screws that were under the pocket clip for this weird frame lock thing. So, which I'm not gonna bother removing that. You can just see plainly what's happening there. These little barrels here that make up part of the back spacer, they have a T6 on the other side as well. Some knives, they have this kind of annoying thing where if they have a T6 on both sides, it might be a free spinning screw on one side. So this is why I have 2 T6s out, is sometimes you need to hold it on one side while screwing in the other, if that makes sense. In this case, these guys are screwed down pretty tight, so I don't think that they'll free spin, but yeah. Over here, what we're looking at is ball bearings that are interfacing between the scale and the knife's blade. You could have different things here. You could have these ball bearings. You could have ceramic ball bearings, which are smoother but more fragile. And you could also just have washers. Some of these knives, like this knife, we might be able to see without me taking it apart. There are on the inside, right here and here, I don't know if you can see that on camera, there are, in this one, little phosphorus bronze washers. You have phosphorus bronze washers. You have phosphorus bronze washers. The washers, as opposed to the bearings, will be less, snappy, less smooth. It won't have as nice and buttery of an action, dropping shut or other, like with just gravity. It won't be as smooth. However, the washers are much less fragile than bearings, and if you're getting sand and dirt and shit in your knife, if you're actually like taking it into an unclean, scenario, which knives are often used in, dirt and dust and sand and grit and grime can get all up in these bearings and kind of mess up the action. So different knives use different things here, whether it be bearings or washers, and you just have to be mindful of the fact that the washers are going to be more secure in a dirty environment, and the bearings are going to have smoother action but be more prone to issues with shit getting all up in your knife and making it gritty and problematic to open. So that's just a consideration. Everything has gives and takes and trade-offs and pros and cons, so to speak. So I think that's pretty much everything I want to show here. I will mention over here, there's this other little barrel kind of thing. You know how along you have all these body screws. This one is, as typical, also the stopper over here, where you see when the knife is open, the back of the blade hits this little metal prong over here, and just make sure it doesn't overextend past that. So there is a different name for it than stopper. I just can't think of it right now, but you get the gist of mechanically what its purpose is. So yeah, so I think right now I'm going to put these bearings back in and start taking the knife back together. You can see it's a pretty simple mechanism, but it's quite a reliable one. Those things often go hand in hand. So for our bearings here, I'm gonna want, you can see there's 2 sides on the bearings. There is a side that, I don't know if I can get it to focus, a side that you can see like the inset that the ball bearings are in, and the other side is just flat with the faces of the balls like protruding out. This is the side that you want to be making contact with the actual blade. So this is what I mean. The back side here is on the scale or on the handle part of your knife, and this is the rolly smooth part that you want on the actual blade. At least that's how I've always done it and how I understand it to go, and I'm fairly confident that that is viable information. So I'm gonna go ahead and drop this bearing in here. I'm gonna get this pivot screw. Which side is this? This is, okay. I'm gonna get this side of the pivot. I'm gonna thread it through. I'm gonna knock the bearing out of there and do that again. There we go. There's also, I noticed in this side, there's a little washer as well behind the bearing that goes in here. That's kind of weird. That's atypical in my experience to have like a stack of a really thin washer and a bearing. So I just wasn't going to mention it because, I mean, in my experience, you typically don't even see that with knives, but I guess this knife has that going on. There's also one present over here, but it just stayed stuck in the, thingy-majig, in the cutout there. But so that's kind of another little quirk about this knife in my experience. It's not something I see very often, but all right, now I'm going to put this back spacer back over here. It's going to fit over these two posts. And the back spacer is helping provide, rigidity to the knife. It's just for the sake of its construction. I'm going to add this other bearing on here, again, keeping this side in which the balls are just protruding and you don't actually see like the track that they're on. That side is going to be touching the blade. So in this case, face down. So that's what's in contact with the blade, okay? I hope that makes sense. That is, in my opinion, pretty important. It will change the way that interfaces. Okay, now I'm gonna put this guy down on top. Ooh, the little washer fell out again. That's okay, I'm just gonna stack it on top of the bearing. I hope that it's somewhat visible what I'm doing. There we go. And now I'm gonna line these things up, get everything to positively click in place. It looks like that is currently the case. I'm going to put my pivot screw back in. That has, thank God, been freed from the clutches of some bullshit Loctite. Now I can easily take this knife apart with no issue. I believe that these guys were my pocket clip screws, and I think that these guys are my body screws. It looks that way. Again, hopefully I don't have to hold it on the other side, but I don't think it's gonna spin. Yes, excellent. It's tightening up and the other one's not spinning, so I won't have to fuck around and use two screwdrivers at once because that would have been embarrassing. I did film this video one time before, and I just had issues with it, but generally I struggled with that quite a bit because I did have one free spin in the last video and I had to try to hold a screwdriver in both hands at the same time while propping the knife up, and it was just kind of embarrassing, especially because I'm trying to not have to edit anything down. Okay, it looks like everything's back together. Now, I didn't check how tight I put the pivot. Let's just see how everything locks up. Okay, right now the blade is completely off track and off center. I think it's way loose, so I'm just gonna start tightening that down a little bit. I could have started a little tighter. There we go, tightening it down a little bit more. I often, you'll learn to feel it out, but I tighten it just up until right before there's like resistance usually. And then I see that the blade has gone centered, which is perfect, and it's not taking a whole lot of effort to open. So the D10 again is still a little tight on this knife, but right now it looks perfect. And then the final check is there's no play up and down or side to side. The knife is rock solid opened. It is a bank vault. It's not wiggling anywhere. As soon as there's any kind of wiggling going on, you might want to try to tighten up your pivot a little bit, because that might be the issue, is that it's simply just gotten a little bit loose from use. And that is why they put Loctite in it. But again, you want to be able to access your knife, and it doesn't hurt to every now and then just do a quick, just a little tiny 1/4 of an inch turn is all it takes to keep things nice and steady. Let's put the pocket clip back on. It goes on this side because I'm right-handed, because I'm not a freak of nature. I'm going to drop in my little screw over here, and I'll make a knife of the week episode at some point where I'll go over some of my tools. And you really don't need much more than a bit driver with like 2 bits. I mean, this NAF's bit driver, it comes with a T6, a T8, and a T10. Some knives sometimes need T10, but very rarely. And that's like most of anything you would ever need when taking apart 98% of knives. So if you're interested in this bit driver, a one and done situation, this is the NAF's bit driver, KNAFS NAF's. But again, keep in mind that for some knives, you do want to have a second thing available. This one's just T6. And I also have this Weehaw one with currently a T6 bit in, if you do need to be using 2 screwdrivers this way, which some knives do kind of need that. So I would say two T6s and two T8s, and you're golden. And that can be achieved very, very, very inexpensively. I mean, like, you could find those things for like $10 for all of them. Like, this thing costs like $2, and it's on Amazon, and it's just a T6. You could get, you know, 2 of these and 2 that are just T8, or again, you could get a replaceable one. Why am I fucking talking about screwdrivers? That will be another episode. I don't know, but I already gave you a little bit of an idea on it there. If this knife wasn't already just drenched in oil, in baby oil, mineral oil is what you want to be using. If this thing wasn't already drenched in mineral oil, when I had it open, I would have put a couple of drops in the pivot, like, you know, in the bearings, a couple of drops on the inside, rub them around on the steel parts to prevent corrosion, but clearly it's already plenty oiled. And just keep in mind, you don't need to take your knife apart to oil it and to keep it from getting, you know, rusty. You could just I use this needle nose applicator, which is really handy and again, extremely inexpensive on Amazon or whatever. I have my mineral oil in it, which you can get at any drugstore or whatever, also inexpensive. And I could just do a couple of drops right here, tiny little squeeze, tiny little squeeze, you know, put a little bit of it on the blade, tiny little squeeze, and just like spread it with my finger, wipe off the excess, etc. And I would just do that after every few times I've carried it, or if I know it's been sweated on, etc. But you don't, as long as you just remember to do it every now and then, you should never have an issue with that. Okay, we've done the takedown and everything. We've gotten intimately familiar with the Kershaw Natrix. We have seen its insides, its outsides. I forgot to put one screw back in. I was like, what is that screw? I forgot to put this guy back on the pocket clip. Just had a light panic attack. I did not feel like reopening this guy up, but thankfully it's a very quick fix. I just got ahead of myself talking about screwdrivers and forgot to finish mounting the pocket clip. But now we're all good. And again, I'm keeping it quite tight, but not so tight that it's going to be a nightmare to take them out, and not so tight that I'm damaging the, you know, screws or the threading or other. So excellent. Now that we're super familiar with this knife, I think we're going to do just a little cut test to see if it needs any sharpening. I will also have a video on sharpening eventually. I'm grabbing a little piece of paper. We've got, ooh, beautiful blue purple construction paper. Great choice today. Great construction paper. And I believe this knife is already quite sharp right now, but I'll just quickly check it out as we're kind of doing maintenance on it. Oh yeah, it's already quite sharp. And that's just using my Work Sharp field sharpener and doing 5 minutes of sharpening and honing it after last time I used it. So this is not rocket science to achieve this kind of edge. And you could get much sharper yet than this. Like, this is like, you can get crazy sharp, but I just used this guy, and these results are perfectly convenient for me. I don't really need my knife to be much sharper than that ever. This is already plenty sharp, and it will remain so for quite a while because D2 has pretty good edge retention, generally speaking. So let me get some of this oil out the way. Okay. I'm also standing now, so the microphone might sound completely different because my face is 3 inches from the phone at this point. I think that's everything I'd want to cover with this. My final thoughts. I've alluded to earlier that this, I think, is a absolutely viable knife to just do it all for somebody, for a day-to-day knife, unless they had some really specific needs and use cases for it. And I would give it an overall, if I had to give knives a rating at the end of these, I would give this guy a 7.8. And I will do decimals because I think there's a wide spectrum between like a 7 and an 8 and a, you know, and like a 8 and a 9. You get where I'm coming from, I think. I give this guy a 7.8. My only complaints, plural, my nitpicks, I wish this pocket clip was inset inside of the scale instead of the hardware sticking out. I don't know if this is a better view than you had before. I wish it was flush like this, which again, that's just a detail, but it's a a good detail in my opinion that I love to see. And two, and I think that this is just going to resolve itself from using the knife, the detent right now is quite tight. Oh, and I totally forgot to show off the detent ball while I had it open. That is stupid, but I can maybe kind of show it here now anyways. So without taking the knife apart, you can see right here I've lined up the blade in such a way that there is, wow, that's so bright. There is a visible little notch over here. This is a little hole, a little socket that's in the actual blade itself. Now, you can see maybe in the liner here, there is a tiny, tiny little ball. There we go. I think you can see it right here. You see that? That little ball that's on the inside of this liner over here is interfacing when the blade is closing with that socket. That is the detent ball and the detent that the knife thus acquires. Other types of locks might not have that. For example, axis or crossbar locks like this, or button locks like this, they rely on spring tension, on like a plunge that is being held by a spring to actuate the lock. And so these guys don't have a detent ball that makes that crisp break. The positive side is that these are so easy to open. They are really reliable to open, and they shouldn't ever have any issues, but they don't have a detent quite the same. So you can, if you really flick it, you can shake it open like this without actuating the lock, which is a nitpick of mine. I don't really like that about crossbar locks and button locks. As much as I love these knives, I do like when it's like really, really so secure that I could, you know, run around with this knife loose in my shorts and it wouldn't even, you know, begin to open up like this, you know, because I don't want that to happen. That being said, I've never once had an issue with it. It's just like a theoretical issue or a theoretical complaint, really. I've never had any of these knives open in my pocket by accident. That just never happened with any knife that I own. But I like it better when they have just the right amount of detent. Like this is a cheap but awesome knife from Sencut, which is the budget line from Civivi, which is another popular Chinese manufacturer that makes just really good knives. Just some of the most iconic knives in the folding knife enthusiast industry. This guy has like a perfect amount, like the detent is perfect. And again, we'll see if we can spot that the ball on the inside there. I'm not sure if I can get it to be visible. You can, yeah, I think you can kind of see that, like right here. That little ball on the inside of the liner is the detent ball. Well, this guy has it dialed down perfectly where it would never be able to be shaken open, but it takes just the right amount of effort to kickstart that lock and, you know, have the blade rocket open. So that's something I think will improve on this guy with time and with using it and with kind of wearing down on that ball and on that socket. So I think that's my final thoughts on this knife. This has been the first KOTW. I hope you enjoyed. I wonder what we'll cover next. I might do a thing on just tools and sharpening, and yeah, so, or maybe I'll go right into looking at another knife. Let me know what you think. If you did watch this far into the video, if you did enjoy and watch this. Again, this is more so for me. This is just a lot of fun for me, but if anyone else is enjoying it and watching it and you have any suggestions as to what to do differently in the next one, or what you would like to see, or if there's a specific knife that you are interested in me doing, I might have it in my collection, and if I don't, maybe I would even acquire it and do one of these videos, depending on the price and the timing, of course. So keep your testicles lathered in lotion, and remember, donate, donate, donate.